Hello, I'm Lauren Doyle and I'm in sixth year. Today I'm going to be interviewing renowned opera director Orpha Phelan. Orpha has directed numerous operas, including Fidelio and La Cenerentola. So, Orpha, welcome. It's so nice that you could be here today. It's nice to see you.
Hi, Lauren. Nice to be here.
So, I saw your production of La Cenerentola and I just wanted to ask, how did you go from such a big opera fan to being a full-time opera director?
Oh, wow. That's sort of a long story. I'll try to cut it a bit short. I did economics in UCG, and then I went from there to do a master's in London. And at that point, I knew that I was very interested in opera, but I wasn't really aware of the role of a director, really, as such. And it was when I was doing my master's that I was going to see 3, 4 operas a week. And it occurred to me that there was one thing that I could do in this art form, and that was to direct. I knew that I couldn't sing. I knew I couldn't dance, I couldn't conduct. And although I had studied music to an extent, I was never going to be a professional musician. But there was this one thing that I really felt sort of drawn to, and that was the staging. And so it took quite a while. I finished my master's in arts criticism with a view originally to writing about the arts. But I suppose it was over the course of the following few years, when I was still going to see lots of operas, that I made the decision to work for free initially, to sort of test the waters, and I worked as an assistant director. It was a sort of a revelation, really. It was so exciting for me to be in a room with real live singers and see them bring something to life that I had never imagined I would be in such an atmosphere. And I just thought, gosh, I don't want to go back to my job. I certainly learned much of my craft as an assistant director, and I worked with some really great people, and I am sort of forever indebted to them. But in the end, it seemed like the obvious thing. I suppose I found myself in the right place at the right time, and I made the decision that this was the road I was going to go down. And it wasn't necessarily the easiest road, and it has not been the most lucrative my whole life. But I have been very rich in terms of spiritually and culturally. I think I couldn't be richer.
Is there much of a difference between doing new operas compared to old operas, more of a challenge, or are they kind of the same in kind of creativity?
No, they're very different. I think the challenge of directing an old, well-known piece is to bring your unique take on it. I mean, why another production of The Marriage of Figaro? Why another production of Bohème? People do look to the director to have a unique take on it and bring something new. The challenge of working on a new piece, like the next 2 pieces that I'm doing, are world premieres. And with those, the challenge is the piece is not well known, so it's more difficult to learn, to study. Often there aren't recordings available. And so the challenge there is to do something which is not necessarily about my interpretation of it, but about doing something that the composer and the librettist feel is worthy of their, this is their baby, and I need to look after it, while feeling that I can distance the composer and the librettist so that I can get on with my job, yet including them enough so that they feel like they're part of the collaboration.
One of my favorite aspects of opera is how real the characters are. And I'd like to know, how does a director convey the kind of humanity and the realness of the characters through the staging?
I tend to work in a fairly naturalistic way, which allows I think most of my operas are very intention driven, and not choreographed in terms of movement. And I think by allowing singers by demanding of singers that they sort of question always their intention. Why are you doing that? Where have you come from? Where are you going? Where are you in your life right now? Where is this character? Why will this character behave in such a way? That they are constantly motivated by their intention and not by acting for the sake of acting. I think that's one of the things that can give opera a bad name, the sort of melodramatic acting that went along with opera. It's not so prevalent now at all, but there was a period when I guess opera was thought of as this sort of big art form, big melodramatic art form that had very little to do with real people. And I think for me, the most important thing is that everything on stage is there for a reason. People are doing things because they are feeling something.
Another thing I found I think is really interesting that you mentioned was that people can kind of find the melodrama of opera a bit too much, and sometimes people just regard it as an art form that's a bit over the top too much. And as a young opera fan myself, I think it's quite irritating when people have a lot of preconceptions about opera. And one of the things that I find as a young person is that loads of young people find opera as really out of date. But I wouldn't necessarily think that for the same reasons that you said earlier. But why do you think specifically it's good to show opera in, say, a modern setting, for example?
Well, I don't necessarily think it's good to show opera in a modern setting. I don't have a formula as such. I think sometimes it's good to update. Sometimes it's good to change the period, but not necessarily have a modern period. Sometimes it's good to set something in the future. Sometimes it's good to set something in the past. I think it's important as a director that you respond to the piece. The company that you're working for will often sort of determine in one way or another how you do something. Like I would do something very differently in Ireland than I would if I were asked to direct something at the Komische Opera in Berlin. So you respond to the company and to your audience. But I think in answer to the question about opera not being that interesting for younger people, I think actually young people who go to see operas are generally wowed. I mean, what is not to love? Whether you go to something small, if it's small and it's intimate, then you've got somebody's voice, moments away from you, or if it's bigger, then you'll have a different scale, which is also very exciting. I think there are people have an idea about opera. But those people are generally people who haven't seen it. They think opera is fat ladies with plaits shrieking at the top of their voices, and there can be a bit of that. But I think nowadays there's very little room for that because audiences don't tolerate it. With people watching so much on screens and the quality of acting on television and movies, so wonderful that opera singers have really had to up their game. And I think generally, like if you think of, you saw Cenerentola in Ireland, Tara and her colleagues, although what they were doing was in a way actually slightly managed because we were telling the story through we were telling a fairy story, Cenerentola, Cinderella. It is a fairy story. But we decided to emphasize the fairy story element of it. And so we had these fairy characters coming to life. But within the confines of that, I think Tara and her colleagues managed to bring a whole sort of humanity and a simplicity and a beauty to their performance. And I think they are the sort of a wonderful example of how opera can be magical and set in another time, in a very beautiful period, yet be absolutely resonant and up to date, you know.
So what sort of key things would you use through the staging to kind of get people thinking? What would be the key things that you would kind of instantly say, oh, this would be a nice thing for the audience to think about? Or what sort of things do you think are the most important things to get right so the audience will be able to interpret it for themselves?
I think it's really important that the motivation of the performers is clear, that if there is something stylized, and in my production sometimes there is, that it's there for a reason and it's there to help with the story. And I think if the director can respect the music, there will be a healthy balance between the music and the words. One of the things I love about working in opera is that I work with the designer. And the designer and I are a team. And I will choose one designer for one opera and another designer for another opera. And it's very much based on my relationship with the designer and how he or she, I feel, will respond to certain music. So, for example, I might ask one designer to design something by Debussy, and I might ask another designer to design something by Rossini. And it will be because I feel that they will be able to create something with me that will be exciting, yet related to the music, and to the piece. And I suppose one of the key ways that a director creates anything on stage is through the set. So although the set is crucial, of course, and the lighting are crucial, the main thing, I suppose, is that for me is that I also work with good singers. And as long as I've got those sort of raw ingredients, singers who listen and question their reasons for doing things on stage, and who don't always do it like this because that's how I did it the last time, but instead are happy. For example, Tara, again, I mean, I don't know how many productions of Cenerentola she has done, but every day she would come into rehearsals, you know, big smile and say, right, so what are we doing today? And she would always be thinking. And it was like it was the first time she had done it because she was so open. And I think that's one of the really important things as a director, that you can sort of harness people's desire to do well, and strike a balance between getting something out of them that they have, that they're dying to give you, and making it work within a production. And I think, I mean, a lot of the role of being a director is being a sort of an amateur psychologist as well, because, you know, somebody comes into a rehearsal and you think, oh, wow, they've had a bad evening, or they've just had a bad phone call. And that may be well and good, but we've only got 3 hours in which to do this scene, and how to navigate your way through a rehearsal to get what you need at the end. And sometimes there can be no negotiation, because you have little time and you're working with a lot of people. And sometimes you can really play with things and let just sort of see what happens. And I suppose it's really important to, as a director, to know what position you're in on what day and what sort of rehearsal that's going to be.
My favourite opera is, of course, The Magic Flute by Mozart, which is famously filled with lots of symbolism and deep themes, despite the kind of fairy tale-like story. How do you use these kind of symbolisms to come up with your ideas for the staging?
I don't have a formula, really. I suppose I listen to a piece, I study the libretto, I listen to what it says to me, and I generally think more about the people on the stage and their reasons for doing things, rather than what I think a grander message of a piece will be. Because I think as a director, you can't make that grand message without thinking of the little people on the stage and their sort of daily lives within the opera, their hopes, their dreams, their fears. So for me, it's actually about starting fairly small, I suppose, and not thinking about the symbolism in too structured a way, because it will come out anyway, and inevitably it does shine through. But it's not necessarily for me the most important thing. I think it is for some directors, but I'm much more interested in the human beings on the stage.
What has been your favorite opera to direct? If you could direct any opera, which one would you find the most interesting to do?
Ooh, that's a really hard one. I've loved every opera I've directed, for one reason or another. I think it was really nice working in Ireland, directing Cenerentola. The cast was a really lovely mix of Irish women, and then the men happened to be, I don't think this was a conscious decision, but the men happened to be from abroad. And so there was a lovely sort of marrying of nationalities and ideas. It's really special working in Ireland. I've been living in London now for 25 years. And when I go home, I get a bit of culture shock, because it's remarkably friendly. And I don't think anybody who lives in Ireland really understands that. I think you have to live away for quite a long time to appreciate that. So one of the lovely things was working with Irish people, the lovely company INO, and being surrounded by very talented people. I've also, for different reasons, I loved directing Billy Budd by Benjamin Britten. Britten's probably one of my favourite composers. So to get to work on a piece like that was very exciting. And that was also with a company that I know and love very much, Opera North. And then different it's exciting and wonderful working in different countries. I do a lot of work in Scandinavia, and that's a very, very different place to work. That's also lovely. If I could direct any opera, gosh, I love Britain, so I'd probably say Peter Grimes if I were to direct a new opera. And if I were to direct an opera that I have directed before, so a new production, but of an opera that I know really well because I've worked on it before, I'd probably say Bohème, because it's perfect.
Well, that was my last question, Orpha. It was so nice to interview you.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be interviewed. Thank you, Lauren.